I thought we were building a secure future together. We owned a home, planned for retirement, and talked about the years ahead. Then a single phone call shattered everything I thought I knew. Within days, I discovered my husband had been hiding a mountain of debt for years, and suddenly, the marriage I trusted felt like it was built on secrets.
Welcome back to God Showed Up Stories. Some betrayals don't begin with an affair. Some don't involve another person. Sometimes betrayal arrives in the form of a secret, a hidden decision, a truth that was kept in the dark for far too long. Trust is one of the most valuable things we can build in any relationship. And when trust is broken, the damage reaches far beyond the original problem. Fear enters. Questions appear. Security disappears. Many people know what it's like to discover something that changes how they view a relationship. Maybe you've experienced financial hardship. Maybe you've struggled with broken trust. Maybe you've faced a season where the future suddenly felt uncertain. If so, this story is for you. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who may need encouragement. And comment below. Trust can be rebuilt. Never forget this. Some of life's hardest seasons don't destroy us. They reveal what we're willing to rebuild. All right, let's get into the story.
For most of our marriage, I believed we were on the same page financially. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We paid our bills, owned a modest home, saved for retirement, talked about future vacations, and occasionally dreamed about what life might look like once the children were fully grown and living on their own. I trusted my husband completely, not because he was perfect, because for more than 20 years, he had been my partner, my teammate, the person I believed was working beside me toward the same goals. At least, that's what I thought. The first sign that something was wrong came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was at work when my phone rang. The caller introduced herself from a financial institution. At first, I assumed there had been some mistake. Perhaps paperwork had been mixed up. Maybe someone had entered the wrong number. But as the conversation continued, a knot began forming in my stomach. The woman mentioned an overdue account, then another, then a balance that was far larger than anything I recognized. I remember sitting there completely confused. None of it made sense. When I got home that evening, I asked my husband about it. His reaction told me everything before he even spoke. The color drained from his face. His eyes dropped toward the floor. And in that moment, I knew there was more to the story. What followed was one of the longest nights of my life. Over the next several hours, pieces of the truth slowly emerged. Credit cards, personal loans, debt consolidation attempts, financial decisions he had made without telling me, balances that had accumulated over years. Not months, years. The total amount left me speechless. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I wasn't just shocked by the numbers. I was shocked by the secrecy. The man I trusted most in the world had been carrying this alone. And worse, he had hidden it from me for years. I barely slept that night, or the next, or the week after. My mind raced constantly. Could we lose the house? What would happen to our retirement? How much of our future had already been damaged? Would our children be affected? Questions seemed endless, and underneath all of them was something even more painful. Trust, or rather, the absence of it. I found myself questioning everything. If he could hide this, what else didn't I know? Had our conversations been real? Had our plans been real? Had our partnership been real? The debt wasn't just financial. It felt personal, deeply personal. Arguments became frequent. Sometimes we talked calmly. Sometimes we didn't. Some nights ended in silence. Other nights ended in tears. Both of us were hurting, but for very different reasons. I was carrying betrayal. He was carrying shame. And neither of us knew how to bridge the distance growing between us. Weeks later, we met with a financial advisor. The meeting was uncomfortable, humbling, and overwhelming. For the first time, all the numbers sat in front of us in black and white. No hiding, no minimizing, no avoiding reality. The situation was serious, but not impossible. Still, I left feeling emotionally exhausted. Afterward, instead of driving home, I stopped at a nearby park. I found a bench overlooking a small pond and sat there alone. The weather was beautiful, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were too loud. I remember staring at the water and asking God a question I had repeated many times over the previous weeks. How do you move forward when trust has been broken? Not damaged, broken. How do you rebuild something that feels shattered? For several minutes, I sat there in silence, watching ducks move across the water, listening to the wind, trying not to cry. That's when I noticed an older couple nearby. They were feeding ducks and laughing together. Nothing about them stood out at first, just two people enjoying a peaceful afternoon. But eventually, the woman smiled and commented on how determined one particular duck seemed to be. It was such a simple observation that it made me laugh, and somehow that small moment led to a conversation. At first, we talked about ordinary things: the weather, the park, retirement, life. But as often happens with strangers, the conversation became more honest than I expected. Maybe because they sensed something was wrong. Maybe because I was carrying so much emotion. Eventually, I mentioned that my family was going through a difficult season. I didn't share every detail, just enough. The older woman listened quietly, then exchanged a glance with her husband, a look that seemed to communicate years of shared history. And then she said something that immediately caught my attention. We almost lost our marriage over debt. For a moment, I simply stared at her, because out of all the people I could have met that afternoon, here was someone describing the exact struggle I was facing. What began as a casual conversation suddenly became something much deeper. And before we parted ways, they shared wisdom that would change how I viewed the entire situation. What began as a casual conversation in the park quickly became something much deeper. The older woman listened carefully as I shared pieces of what had happened. Not every detail, just enough. Enough for her to understand the fear, the betrayal, the uncertainty. When I finished speaking, she reached over and gently touched my arm. Then she said something that immediately caught my attention. 32 years ago, I sat exactly where you're sitting. I looked at her in surprise. She smiled softly. My husband hid debt from me, too. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Out of all the people I could have met that afternoon, here was someone who had survived the exact crisis I was facing. The older man beside her nodded. I thought I could fix it myself, he admitted. I kept telling myself I'd pay it off before she found out. His voice carried the weight of old mistakes. But every time I failed, I became more afraid to tell the truth. I immediately thought about my husband. The shame, the fear, the secrecy. None of it excused what had happened. But for the first time, I began understanding that what I was dealing with wasn't just financial irresponsibility. It was also fear. Fear that had grown larger year after year. The older woman continued. The debt nearly destroyed us. She paused. But not because of the money. I waited. Because we stopped being honest with each other. Those words stayed with me. Because deep down, I knew she was right. The numbers were frightening, but the broken trust hurt far more. For nearly an hour, we talked. They shared stories about counseling, budget meetings, difficult conversations, arguments, tears, setbacks, slow progress. There was nothing glamorous about their recovery. No sudden miracle. No unexpected windfall. No instant solution. Just thousands of small decisions made one day at a time. Before we parted ways, the older woman shared one final piece of advice. Trust isn't rebuilt through promises. She smiled gently. It's rebuilt through consistency. Then she pointed toward her husband. He spent years earning back what he lost. The older man nodded. And she gave me the opportunity to try. I left the park feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because my problems were solved, because for the first time, I could see a path forward. That evening, I sat down with my husband. The conversation was different than our previous arguments. Instead of focusing entirely on the past, we began discussing the future. not the future we had planned. The future we now had to rebuild. Slowly, honestly, together. The months that followed weren't easy. In many ways, they were harder. There were budget meetings, lifestyle changes, sacrifices, uncomfortable conversations, financial plans taped to the refrigerator, spending habits that needed to change, trust that needed to be earned. Some days felt hopeful, others felt discouraging, but something important was changing. The secrecy was gone. For the first time in years, everything was on the table. Every account, every bill, every concern, every fear. Honesty became the foundation we started rebuilding upon. As time passed, my husband changed too. Not overnight, not perfectly, but consistently. He stopped hiding, stopped avoiding, stopped pretending everything was fine. Instead, he accepted responsibility, and little by little, trust began returning. Not because he demanded forgiveness, because he demonstrated change. One small decision at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one accountable action at a time. Our faith changed too. We prayed differently, not for God to magically erase the debt, but for wisdom, patience, strength, and perseverance. Looking back now, I don't believe God showed up through a financial miracle. I believe he showed up through a conversation in a park, through an older couple who understood exactly what we were facing, through wisdom gained from experience, through the realization that healing often happens slowly. Today, our marriage is stronger than it was before the crisis, not because the debt happened, but because we learned how to face difficult truths together. We learned that trust can be rebuilt, that accountability matters, that honesty matters, and that hope still exists even when life becomes far more complicated than expected. Most importantly, I learned that some marriages survive hardship not because they avoid storms, but because both people choose to keep walking through them together. And sometimes, that's exactly where God meets us.
If this story touched your heart, comment below. Trust can be rebuilt. Maybe you're facing a difficult season right now. Maybe trust has been damaged. Maybe communication has broken down. Maybe you're carrying fears about the future. If that's you, remember this. Healing rarely happens overnight. Trust rarely returns all at once. And difficult seasons are rarely solved through one big moment. More often, healing happens through small decisions made consistently over time. Honesty, accountability, patience, grace, and the courage to keep moving forward. If this story encouraged you, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment below, subscribe to God Showed Up Stories, share this story with someone who may need encouragement. Thank you for spending this time with us. And always remember, God always shows up right on time.